Hello, everybody. This is further defining the idea ratio. Specifically, how many ideas does one need to generate to get to a big idea? And also, let me thank you for your patience. This is a follow up to our presentation at the 17th International Conference on Design Principles and Practices, and it is the foundational preview for the workshop we will be conducting at the 19th International Conference on Design Principles and Practices at the end of February. I sincerely hope you can join us, whether that's in person or virtually, because I think you might like what we're going to do. So, we all know this common truth. In the world of design, we understand that there are ideas and then there are big ideas. What that means is that some ideas are better than others. So, when we ideate to solve a hairy challenge, we aren't looking for ordinary ideas. We're looking for those exceptional ones, the ones we call the big ideas. And we all have different names for these. In the world of strategic communication, those big ideas, we often just refer to them as concepts. Concepts were a way of saying that this idea, it's bigger, it's better than the others. So dozens, scores, hundreds of ideas would be pitched to creative directors, they'd be pitched to partners, we would pitch them to each other. And the majority of those ideas, and you've probably been through this, would be dismissed because they were not big ideas. They weren't concepts. But that always raises the question, what makes an idea a concept? What makes it big? In the argot of the industry, what we say is a concept is an idea with an insight and an execution. Okay, that at least gets us that definition of the difference. But then that also raises the question, well, what is an insight? For our purposes, we're going to call an insight that eureka moment. And we have our old friend Archimedes, who got into the bathtub and documented the first eureka moment. And that represents an unconventional leap in thinking. It represents a leap in thinking that wouldn't occur to us right away. That's why he jumped out of the bathtub and yelled Eureka. He had been trying to solve a problem over and over and over. And all of a sudden, his mind made this leap, this unexpected leap, and he yelled, Eureka. Fortunately, there's a whole study of insights out there, and this definition really aligns with what we're talking about. An insight involves a person making a radical shift in her mental model. And this is from the naturalistic study of insights. So, a radical shift in the mental model. That starts to say that maybe the big idea is different than the ordinary idea. So, what we can do is we can put these together and we can say, all right, well, then a concept, a big idea, is an idea with a novel or radical element. And that rings pretty true. If you've ever worked with a creative director, you've always heard them say, show me something I haven't seen before. What they're calling for is a novel idea. All right. So this puts us in a good spot. We have a working definition of a big idea. So now we can get out of those subjective arguments that somehow your idea is just as good as mine. We're like, no, if it's not a big idea, it's not a big idea because it lacks that radical or unexpected leap in thinking. So if we're looking for big ideas, those new ideas, those unexpected ideas, it raises this question. How many ideas does one need to generate in order to stand a reasonable chance that one of them is big? If you've ever been a junior creative or a junior designer, you've asked yourself this. How many ideas do I have to show this person before they're going to pick one? What's wrong with all these? Well, the feedback you would get is, well, they're not big yet. Meet the idea ratio. Wish I'd coined this term, but I love the term. So the idea ratio came out of Stanford University. This team published a study on this, and what their quote is that we can work off of. In our experience, the answer is something on the order of 2,000 to 1. They're basically saying, how many ideas do you need to generate to get to a big idea, a great idea, they actually called it. In their experience, on the order of 2,001. So you notice they didn't get very specific. They sort of said, on the order of 2001. And they said, we call this the idea ratio, the ratio of ideas to a great idea, to a big idea. Okay, great. We can work with that. But if you ever ideated for a living, you're like 2000 to 1. Are you kidding me? If I have to come up with a new idea for a print advertisement or design an app or a logo, I got to go through 2,000 iterations? So I was complaining when I just had to do 50 variations on a logo design. 2,000 to 1 seems daunting, but this is what their data shows. So, right? Science, we got to at least go with the science. But here's the good news. Here at the University of Colorado, we found that we actually had a data set where we could further define the idea ratio. Let's pressure test this. Let's review 2,000 to 1 and see what our number comes up with. Because we're asking the same question. How many ideas do we need to generate to come up with a big one? We came up with a challenge that seemed to fit into this pretty well. Basically, we challenged 158 creative thinkers to come up with 50 ideas to sell a brick that couldn't be used as a brick. Okay, if you've ever done creative workshops or you've ever been in team meetings where we need to generate that big idea, we need to come up with something better, this exercise ought to feel pretty familiar. It's nothing particularly novel. The good news is that this challenge netted us a data set of 7,216 ideas to sell a brick that can't be used as a brick. So if we follow the initial definition of the idea ratio, we should probably see maybe 3 big ideas in this data set. All right, we've got something to work with. That would be the ratio if ideas were really 2,000 to 1. How many ideas out of these 7,216 are big? How many are concepts? So now we've got a definition that says insight requires overcoming functional fixedness. And now we've got an exercise that will prime someone ideating to overcome functional fixedness. By trying to overcome functional fixedness, and what that means is functional fixedness is seeing the object for the only use that we know it can be used for. So the functional fixedness of a brick is it's used for building. We construct with it. We make paths. We make buildings. We make walls. So by trying to overcome the functional fixedness of only seeing a brick as a brick, those who were brainstorming ideas to solve the challenge, they were actually primed to dig for ideas with insights. Okay, so we've got our mental gold mine is ripe for finding those nuggets, those big ideas. And this was the follow up to that. If in these brainstorming sessions, participants could come up with ideas with insights, well, then we could say the chances are those ideas were big. Those were the concepts, because that's how we've defined a big idea. A big idea is an idea with an insight. It's a novel or radical leap. All right, it feels like we're getting somewhere. So I'll go ahead and give you the answer because not everyone wants to sit through this presentation. It's like those old recipe sites. Just give us the good stuff. In our analysis of that data set, we actually arrived at this number. The idea ratio was closer to 376 to 1. So we actually found more than 3 ideas out of those 7,000 that there was a consensus that those were big ideas. Those were special. Those were out of the ordinary. All right. So if you want to stop the presentation here, you can. You've got the data set, In the fall of 2022, the idea ratio was defined as roughly 2,000 to 1. By the spring of 2023, we actually had a data process set that defined the idea ratio of 376 to 1. Still a lot of ideas to generate to come up with a big one, but a little more manageable than 2,000. Not as neat and tidy as, bring me 10. But if you're a creative director, you can stop here if you want and just feel validated that you're asked to bring me lots and lots of ideas until we see one that jumps out that's big. You are validated in your process. For the others who are curious or suspicious, depending on how you're taking this situation, my guess is you're going to want a little bit of our methodology and our background. So that's what we got going on here. So how did we get to this number? If you're a good skeptic, you're asking this question. Let's go to the process. Scanning 7,216 ideas for concept potential felt like looking for a needle in a haystack by carefully examining each piece of straw. We could, but on some hand, it sort of says, ain't nobody got time for that. That seems like a lot of work. And then, during our investigation, we actually had an insight that could solve this challenge of scanning every single idea for insight potential. And our sort of leap in thinking was, Rather than look for ideas with insights in every single idea, what if we first eliminate all the ideas that obviously lacked insight? Let's just get rid of them. If we can just flag them quickly as lacking insight, we wouldn't have to think about them. We wouldn't have to scan them. This actually proved very fruitful. And if you've been a creative director, you've probably arrived at this conclusion yourself independently, which is, all right, let's not comment on every single idea submitted to us. We don't have to fix all the ideas. We're looking for one or two big ones. So let's just eliminate the ones we know don't work. So by quickly eliminating all the ideas that lacked insight, the supposition was the remaining ideas should possess the greatest potential to contain insights, and therefore they had the greatest potential to be concepts. So the authors, we said, all right, we've got to start defining the hallmarks for a lack of insight when reviewing these potential concepts. So we're looking at all these ideas to sell a brick that can't be used as a brick. What are the hallmarks for an obvious lack of insight? Let's start there. And something that came up, and I want to share this with you, is that these lack of insight rules are and ought to be strategically defined criteria. And this is why we're going back in 2025 to do this workshop, because this was the question that arose out of our question. Let's define the lack of insight rules. They are the foundation for us processing this enormous batch of ideas. So let's talk about lack of insight one that we've defined. This one, pretty straightforward, off brief. So if the idea uses a brick as a brick, and this one came up a lot, a brick igloo, you might say, oh, that's an innovative use of a brick. But you remember the challenge was we have to sell a brick that can't be used as a brick. So if the idea shows a brick being used as a brick, we could eliminate it right away. We didn't even have to think about it. We could just scratch that one from the data set. And we had a lot. There were a lot of ideas that got eliminated this way. Retaining wall, doghouse, sidewalk pavers, archway, bomb shelter, sustainable flooring, town square, floor tiles, brick igloo, fire pit, outhouse, walkway border, outdoor table, building material, reef construction, nonprofit building. Interesting ideas, right? But we can look at these and say, well, those are all using a brick for construction purposes or a normal purpose we normally see a brick being used for. Therefore, it doesn't meet the very first standard of the challenge is sell a brick that can't be used as a brick. They're using it as a brick. It's off brief. All those ideas eliminated from the data set. All right, we defined a lack of insight two, a second lack of insight. This one seems obvious, but you'd be surprised it caused a lot of debate. We just sort of said, all right, if the idea is too unclear to be determined, let's not try to fix it. Let's not try to improve it. Let's just say it's too vague to be determined, and we're going to eliminate that from the data set. So vague ideas aren't ideas that can be used to sell a brick because we don't even know what it means. Let's give you some examples. Reminder. What? Military. Halloween decoration. Art piece. Pot. Pennywise brick. Who knows what it means? Parking. Okay. We're going to sell a brick for parking. What? Cool device. Yeah, right? Would we all love a cool device? Throne. Air pocket. Chicken paddle. Still scratching my head at that one. Tumbler trend. Barn use. Painting design. School. Nest plug. You can see the challenge here. We could spend some time trying to understand these, but then we're ideating again. We're not just looking at ideas from the data set that have big idea potential. Are they big ideas? We can't really define what these are, so they're vague. Let's eliminate them. We didn't stop there. We went to a lack of insight three. Not viable. So this one started to pop up because if the idea is not practical or physically possible, does that represent a radical leap in thinking to sell a brick that can't be used as a brick? And we said, no, it doesn't, because if it can't happen physically or it's not practical, well, then it's not a good idea to sell a brick. And even though it's using a brick for its non-intended purposes, it's just not viable. This one came up a lot. Sandals, brick flip-flops. Okay, we can see it. We've got an example here. You can imagine wearing them, but would you ever take more than 3 steps with a brick? If these were on the shelf at your local shoe store, would you say, oh my God, I have to have those brick sandals? It defies logic. So we just say, yes, that is a use for a brick, but it's just not viable. And we had a lot of not viable examples. So sandals, ice cubes, glassware, laptop case, mug, fondue pot, okay, cheese grater, a stuffed animal head, popcorn replacement. Yeah, good luck. Fruit maker, how a brick could produce an apple, not sure. Mattress, yes. Could you turn bricks into a mattress? Yes. Would you want to sleep on it? Doubtful. Water bottle, liposuction tool. Pretty sure the physics don't agree with that. Universal Auto Master Key. We could talk about the tongue in cheek nature of this, but we're just saying that's just not viable. Cooler. I don't see any place to put a soft drink in a brick, so no, not a cooler. An app. Maybe that even belongs in vague. So you can see we're defining these lack of insight gates as we referred to them. We didn't stop. We kept going with this definition of a big idea is an idea with an insight. And so we are always asking, insight has to solve this novel or radical leap in thinking. It has to be new or it has to be radically different. And that led us to lack of insight 4, which was redundant. We actually said, you know what? If the idea already exists as a better solution, well, that doesn't represent a radical leap in thinking. And one that came up a lot is brick speakers, right? And you can see how this happens if you look at a brick this way, especially if it's core drilled. Oh, those look like speakers. Let's turn those into speakers. But that raises the question, is that a radical leap in thinking? Does that represent a big idea? Because why wouldn't we just go with regular speakers? Wood has better resonance. Speakers have been explored and designed for a century. If bricks were a great solution, they would probably already be in place. So if the idea just uses a brick in a novel way, but it's being used in a way that already exists, and the brick is an inferior version of what exists, well, then we said that's a lack of insight because it doesn't represent a radical leap in thinking. Here are some of the redundant examples we defined: stereo speakers, nightlight, umbrella, straight edge, Jenga, the game, nail file, knife sharpener, check caddy, anchor, a designed postcard, a cookie rack, a ruler, a hammer, gym weights. Gym weights was very popular, phone case, and a trivet. All of these are ideas to sell a brick that can't be used as a brick, but these are also all ideas that aren't improved by the brick. They're actually inferior and better solutions exist. So if better solutions exist, does that represent a radical leap in thinking? Are these big ideas? And we said no, because it doesn't ladder up to our definition of a big idea. And here's where we got into territory that started to have some debate. The lack of insight, number 5, was obvious. Now, if you haven't ideated a lot, this may have you scratching your head. If you've been in situations where you have ideated a lot and you've worked in a team who generate a lot of ideas, this one isn't so unexpected. If you're seeing the same idea come up over and over, created independently by different individuals or different teams, well, that's always a clue that, all right, maybe this idea isn't particularly special. If it's an idea that just about anyone would ever come up with, we would say that lacks insight. And you can see this example is our most popular idea by far. Everyone who takes this challenge to come up with 50 ideas to sell a brick that can't be used as a brick, one of those ideas almost always is doorstop. It's amazing how popular a doorstop is. Who knew that stopping doors was such a problem? But it comes up a lot. So the obvious ideas were ones we said, well, those lack insight. For the processing purposes of the brick challenge, we said, and we drew this line in the sand, if a potential concept, an idea, appeared 4 or more times in the data set, we defined it as crossing a threshold into obviousness. And we said, well, we simply saw it too many times for it to be something new or novel or to have an insight. Is 4 the right number? That's what we want to investigate. Is obvious a viable lack of insight gate? If everyone comes up with the idea for a doorstop, is that really a radical leap? Is that an unexpected leap in thinking? I would argue no. You could also call it a duh idea. Duh. I mean, is it really that special? Or is it just an idea that someone comes up with as soon as they start taking on this challenge? So here are the examples we would call obvious. And if you've been playing at home and you've been jotting down your 50 ideas, this is probably the point in the presentation where you might get a little chuffed and sort of say, oh man, doorstop, bookends, window prop, a weapon, a window smasher, candle holder, bug crusher, tire chalk, step stool, dive toy, backpack training weight, bed riser, toilet tank water conserver, succulent planter, aquarium decor, pet rock. Pet rocks were so many years ago, decades ago, and it's amazing how they still stick in the public consciousness. But these obvious ideas, they appear over and over, and they're not really special. Yes, they solve the challenge. These are all ideas that could sell a brick by not using it as a brick, but every single one of these, we've all seen a brick used for in some way in the real world. Maybe you haven't seen a succulent planter, but some blogger years ago suggested that as a way to upcycle bricks, and now it's in the Google search feed, and that's how it pops up. But all of these, even tire chalk, everyone has used a brick as a tire chalk. There's nothing particularly special, innovative, or unexpected by any of these ideas. So we just called these the obvious examples. We said those lack insight, and we broomed them. They're out. So we stopped there. We said, all right, that's at least 5 different checkpoints that we can use to process these ideas to get through them quickly. If any idea hits one of these flags, just toss it out. We called these machine rules, as if the machine was going to be judging this. So then what we did is we recruited 22 people to judge these ideas independently. Typically, you would go to a creative director. There might be a team of 1 or 2. The decider would go through the ideas. We said, you know what, if we've got these machine rules, anyone should be able to process these ideas and look for the big ideas. The judges were given our lack of insight checks, and they were instructed to dismiss all the ideas that lacked insight. Don't give them a second thought. If you see any idea that hits one of these lack of insight checks, cross it out and move on. And then what we tasked them to do was, all right, you've eliminated the lack of insight ideas, review the leftover ideas, and then we want you to choose your top 15 concepts. Choose the ones that you are convinced have an insight, but only from the group that survived the lack of insight cut. So this brought us to an interesting point. If choosing big ideas, if choosing a concept were truly subjective, then the overlap of the judges' final concepts, 15 out of 7,216, you would think would be very slim. Because if they were just choosing subjectively, everyone's preference would lead them to specific ideas, and we'd have very little overlap. But let's get to the good part. These are the results. And we were surprised. As in any investigation, there's always something unexpected. What we weren't expecting was the judges ignoring the machine rules in favor of personal subjectivity. And the worst violators of this, believe it or not, were the creative directors. And the people who had been trained and hired and worked professionally as creative directors. But it's easy to understand. They're so used to looking at ideas that if they saw one they thought they could improve or the one that struck a chord, they went with it, even if it violated our lack of insight rules. And this was 100%. Every single judge, 22 in all, had a portion of their final 15 concepts rejected for containing ideas that lacked insight. So even though we provided the judge with very rigid rules, don't pay attention to these ideas, all the judges came back and had ideas that were machine violations. And we just said, you have to look again. We can't use these. These violate the lack of insight rules. And then what we as the authors had to do, we were sort of the enforcers of the machine rules for lack of insight. And we had to go through a couple of rounds. And finally, we gave up on 15. We said, all right, just get us at least 13. Get us 13 ideas out of the 7,000 plus that make it through your lack of insight gate. And once we were able to get all the judges to at least follow the rules and at least get us more than 10 final concepts that they identified, well, then we compared the results of all the judges and we looked for any matches on what they considered concepts. Did the judges have any agreement on the ideas with insights? Could they agree on the big ideas independently? And without going too deep in the data processing, we found that there were 6 potential concepts, big ideas that had the most matches among the judges. And that's all we found. 6 out of the 22 judges chose DIY denim distressor. Well, look at that. All right. You don't have to go to the store and pay hundreds of dollars to get those worn-in jeans looks. You can buy this kit and make it yourself. 10 out of 22 judges chose purse weaponizer. Not the first thing one would think of when reimagining a brick, but definitely a radical leap in thinking. 10 out of the 22 judges, they liked traffic light for hiking trails. And you won't have traffic jams where someone's trying to go around a corner while someone on the other side's trying to come around a corner. Interesting idea. Unexpected, radical leap in thinking, definitely novel. So it flags a lot of the things, and we can see why the judges agreed that this was a big idea to sell a brick that can't be used as a brick. Now, more than 50% of the judges, they like this next one. The NBA Worst Shooter Brick Trophy. Okay, a little bit of a pun, but hey, you're in an intramural league. You could see this sitting on the shelf. You play with friends. You got a friend who just can't shoot the ball. They always miss. Well, you get them a brick trophy. And you can start to see the packaging. It ticks all the boxes. So a lot of the judges love this one. Almost 60% of the judges agreed on this next one. Egyptian hieroglyph trainer. I bet no one had that on their bingo card if you're listening to this. Maybe you did. Maybe you have that extraordinary imagination. But the idea that there would be a kit where you could learn to carve Egyptian hieroglyphs, novel idea to sell a brick that can't be used as a brick. 15 out of the 22 judges, 68% agreement. And really the overall consensus for a novel or radical idea to sell a brick that can't be used as a brick, business card for a construction company. Almost surprising in its simplicity, but sometimes that simple leap in thinking represents a big idea. It makes a lot of sense. Construction companies need new business. They could leave a pile of bricks out front, engrave their company name on it. Someone passing by says, "Oh, I need a construction company." Sits on the desk, sits nearby, constantly reminds who they saw, what they did. And it's a big idea to sell a brick that can't be used as a brick. And so back to the data. You know, if you're a creative, you might be debating, are those the best ideas? Are those the most viable to sell a brick that can't be used as a brick? All good questions, but we are trying to keep the purity of the exercise, which is how many big ideas exist in our data set of 7,000 ideas? And this is the number, one concept per 1,203 ideas. And you can see we're not far off from the Stanford number of 1 in 2,000. We've improved it by almost half. So, it's not quite 2,000. It's closer to 1,000. Still a lot of ideas. But then what came up was interesting. We normalized the results. And what we did was we removed all the duplicates. Doorstop appeared over and over. Rather than counting all the instances of doorstop, we only counted it once. And so when we normalized the data by removing all the duplicates, we had a total of 2,254 discrete ideas. And when we go by discrete ideas, we can say you can expect a big idea about 1 in 376. That was our further definition of the idea ratio. That's what our data showed. Now, just to review, this is the processing of ideas to discover concepts, the big ideas. We had 158 creative thinkers. They dug up 7,216 ideas. Then 22 judges sorted through all 7,000 of those ideas individually, and they discarded every single idea that lacked insight. And then 4 authors on the study, essentially representing these machine rules we had developed, rejected any of the judges' final choices that lacked insight as well. And that was how we processed the ideas. That's why we're returning to the International Conference on Design Principles and Practices, because we want to collect a new data set with a new challenge, and we want to define the lack of insight going in. And this is where we can use your help. We're just starting to get more discrete on this idea ratio. And so the questions that we have are, how firm is that 376 to 1 idea ratio? That's a question we have. So we're going to hold a workshop. Hopefully before you get to the workshop, you've seen this presentation. So we have a sort of a level set of where we're going. And our new challenge is, all right, let's put the brick aside. Let's sell a crystal ball that can't be used as a crystal ball. So basically at the Design Principles and Practices conferences, the end of February in 2025, we're going to conduct a workshop to define a new set of lack of insight parameters. Now then, if you can't make the conference, you can participate. Just go to sellacrystalball.com and put in your 50 ideas. You don't need to know the lack of insight parameters. Just uncork your imagination and share with us what you want. Your ideas will be added to the data set, and then when it's processed, there will probably be another presentation like this where we share the results, and ideally, we'll have a new idea ratio, or at least one that's been defined again, and we're getting closer because we all want to know that. How many ideas do I need to generate to have a chance at coming up with a big one?